If you want to get wet, go where the water is, and the pool is not the only option to get wet. But again, that's a skills and awareness thing. So it appears that Samad's recording is a bit on the fritz. I don't know if you can hear that, which means you're having a sip with me now. Welcome.
Hey, kings and queens and everything in between. Welcome to this episode of A Sip with Samad podcast. And I'm your host, Samad. Let's jump in. You love me especially different every time I don't know why I decided to go the Karen Clark version. That's not where I wanted to go. Oh, well, that's all y'all getting today. So welcome everyone back to another episode of a Sip with Samad podcast. And you all know who I am. But today is a special episode because we have a very special guest. My good new friend, Amari, who I was introduced to through a mutual friend of ours, Dante, my Morehouse and frat brother. Hey. And so I'm going to let him introduce himself and then we can jump into all the stuff we're going to talk about today.
Awesome. Well, first of all, I am so excited to be here with my new friend. My name is Amari Ice. I am technically the first Black gay certified matchmaker in the entire world, according to the Global Love Institute. I'm a certified science-based dating and relationship coach, #1 best-selling author. I do a little content here and there, helping the gays develop their dating skills and find love. So that's a little bit about me. Also happy to explore anything else you want to know, because I know we're going to get really deep into the deets in this conversation. So let me take a sip now.
So thank you so much for that intro. I like to let people introduce themselves because I don't want to make it seem like I'm doing a church bio. And so thank you for giving that content. You mentioned something and I should have mentioned it too, but now I'm going to mention it. So what am I sipping on? I told John in the last episode, it's not sustainable doing these drinks and trying to make them unless I get a bartender to come in and make the drink over here. We could do a whole Andy or a sip with Samad, actually a sip with Samad with a bartender. So if you are a bartender in the Atlanta area that has a little free time and is not creepy, feel free to come by and we can set you up and you can make drinks in this studio,
Yes, in
my
the
illustrious
stew.
studio. In the stewed. But no, I actually met Amari through, I was supposed to tell you what I'm sipping. I'm sipping tequila. What are you sipping?
I am sipping quadruple distilled
Oh.
agua de filter.
Well, okay. Oh, I love, is that French? That's French.
It's French, you know?
Okay. Oh, no, well, it's a little French and Spanish. Yes.
All I know is it's -100 proof.
So, and that's all that matters. So I want to make note of this because a lot of people think you have to drink in order to be on this show, and you don't have to drink. I just asked you to have a sip because you do have that friend that you go out to drink with and they may not drink, or they might be on a cleanse, or they might be, it might be a religious purpose, or it might be whatever it is, whatever the reason is. You can still drink in front of them. And I actually have some friends who don't drink and they don't like so this is actually a PSA. For your friends who don't like drinking, you can still invite them out to drink unless you're an excessive drinker and you're just throwing it back and that's not their thing. But if you want to go out and have just like you want to have a meal with some friends, you could just have a drink with a friend that doesn't drink. Just like you would go out to eat with a friend who's like, oh, I already ate, but I can still stay and hang out with you.
Absolutely agree. I'm the friend that doesn't drink, and it's not for religious reasons. I just never acquired the taste for alcohol. Now, don't get me wrong. All my friends just about do drink, and they've all tried to, let's say, introduce me to alcohol.
We got to try. We got to try.
We have to. And I have. I've tasted lots of things. Every once in a while, I'll even order a drink, but nothing has stuck. I just don't like the way it tastes. I'm a foodie. And when I say foodie, I mean, let's have everything gourmet, whether we're making it at home or otherwise. I love the flavor of things. And I just can't get with the flavor of most alcohols. So it's just not for me.
Well, I can tell you that this tequila is warming my throat and it's helping me to segue into the next part of this conversation. So
Wait.
Amari did not.
Hold on. We talking into the mic. We gonna talk into the mic.
I just like to give people something they can feel.
Mm-hmm. You know, a little. What did you call it earlier? A nasty note.
Oh, so that's going to be a segment we're going to add to the show called A Nasty Note, because sometimes I do get nasty notes from you all. I guess my voice does it for you, and I'm okay with that.
You know, everybody ain't able, friend.
So what Amari didn't mention to you all is he is a certified, I'm going to call him a love doctor. However, I have his book behind me. He did not ask me to go ahead and display this, but we were talking in our intro call and I was like, oh, you're an author as well? Well, let me go ahead and get this damn book. And so I plan to read this while I'm out on parental leave. I think it's a good read. It looks like a good read. And from what I could tell from the beginning and the end, because that's how I was trained to tell if I'm interested in the book, is look at the beginning and look at the end. It seems like it's going to be a good read. So I'm looking forward to it. And we'll talk about it a little bit more.
Love that. And I may or may not have heard through the grapevine that it was a #1 international bestseller in 6 countries and also
Get out of here.
country, but who's counting?
We are. We're counting.
You know, the people want the receipts and they're there.
Okay. So while love is in the air because we have Amari Ice here, we're going to talk about something a little different today, but it's still related. And so this week in particular, you know, I will say fatherhood. Oh, y'all probably want to know about Avery. I'm sorry, Amari. They ask about her. I'm going to try to start separating Avery from this space. I'm trying to spare her. And y'all can join my little morning sips that I do on Facebook and Instagram now, because, you know, I want to keep this space the adult space. You know, growing up, when our parents had drinks, they would tell us to go in the living room and we shouldn't be seen or heard. And so I want to make sure to keep her in that space versus in this space, which is for the grown folks. But yeah, anyhow, this week I realized, you know, as I'm 40 now, I'm 40 with a child. I'm getting older. And a lot of the conversations I've had, especially since announcing that we welcome the child into our family, is just around like, there's no blueprint for being gay and of a certain age. And me and Alan are reminded of that often. And that when people are in such awe, they're like, oh, you two have been together for 17 years. And yeah, sometimes I can't believe it either. But we didn't have anybody to look at and say, this is what life is going to be like. And it just keeps hitting. It dawns on me every day. Like there was no blueprint for being Black, gay, and 40 and single. There was no blueprint for being Black, gay, and partnered for 17 years. There is no blueprint for being Black, gay, partnered for 17 years with a child. And so I realize we're fumbling as we go, all of us. So there are 3 areas that I wanted to focus in on, Amari, for the sake of this conversation.
Yeah, where are we going?
The first is, what does aging and love look like? Let's start in a space where I know you can go.
Oh, it's juicy.
Yeah, like knowing you can't tell nobody's business, but you at least have cases or experiences, case studies of just people experiencing love or trying to experience love as they get older. Is there still love at 65 and gay?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So here's what's really interesting, right? A lot of times we think of love as a young people's game, right? Like we have this cultural bias toward youth that makes us start to feel insecure as we get older, right? Like, oh, my skin is a little saggy now. I got a couple
stretches.
Right. We got gray hairs in our noses, like all that stuff. And we're like, who's going to
You didn't have to call me out. You did not have to call me out like that. To be
fair, friend, I was calling myself out because I got gray hairs was in my nose and I thought it was a lot. However, you know, our culture has this youth bias that really saturates everything. Like, it's not even just about love, but when we talk about love, especially from the lens of being Black and gay and love and aging, there's some really interesting things that happen. So one, what we know just as context, right? The number one reason anybody is single isn't what many people think it is, right? Like, love isn't a fairy tale. It's much more like a video game. And the primary reason anybody is single is because they're trying to have a level 25 relationship with level 3 dating skills, right? And there are really about 10 dating skill levels altogether, and you only need to be around the level 7 to have the confidence and competence of an effective dater. But if we simultaneously have unrealistic expectations, and that's what our level 25 relationship is, it's like nobody's real relationship actually measures up to that. But we also don't have the skills to handle what is realistic. It's no surprise why many people struggle in dating and relationships. And age does not keep you from that truth, right? Like, just because we get older, we think we like get wiser, but like experience level is not the same as skill level. You was there. So, that doesn't mean you know what you're doing.
So let me ask you a question, though. I get you. So I'll say, like you said, people want caviar love on a Kool-Aid budget.
Yes.
Right. And I guess the question I have is, we have examples of what caviar love looks like from a heterosexual perspective. So putting on a heteronormative lens, we can say we've seen examples of that. Very few examples of Black, but when we have seen it, we've seen the Heathcliff and Claire, right? Huxtables. We've seen those folks. We've seen Harriet and Carl and Vivian and Phil, right? But we haven't seen ourselves. When I say ourselves, I'm saying the LGBTQ community, the Black LGBTQ community at that, represented in these spaces. And so we don't really, like, we're batting in the dark. I'm not arguing this to say that straight people probably have a blueprint, but they do. And they have examples that they can look at. They can look at Barack and Michelle and say, okay, well, at least I know what a level 10 love looks like. Who we got?
You know what is interesting? So it is absolutely important to see ourselves reflected in the world around us, right? Like, it's absolutely important to see ourselves in the media because it gives us these models for what is possible. But like, nobody's relationship is going to look like anybody else's relationship in reality, right? So while we might have these heterosexual models, the Claire Huxtables, like all the people that you mentioned, no one else's relationship is going to look just like that relationship, even if they do have the skills or not, right? So the way I like to think about this is, sure, seeing people who look like you in successful positions is inspiring. Absolutely. But in order to get to that destination, you still have to have the skills to get there, right? And so if we think of this as like, I call this the romantic success strategy. Like, there are 4 things we need to know and or do and or have. The first is who you are, right? Because before we even get into the conversation of what we want, what we need to know who we are, because what we really need is a function of who we really are. So the first thing is self-awareness. The second thing is the clarity about what we want and need from a partner. The third thing is the plan to actually achieve that relationship. And then the fourth thing is the skills to implement the plan and sustain the results. But a lot of times we're looking at the goal and we're not really looking at, but what are the real logistics to get there? And that's where we get disappointed because we have these expectations. Even when we do have possibility models, we think that we can get that tomorrow. And we don't realize that these things were built day by day, piece of effort by piece of effort, based on the skills that people had and developed as they went along. So sometimes we have this unrealistic expectation that I should have that because I'm a certain age or because I have certain other achievements in our lives. And we have this level of entitlement that keeps us from actually doing what it takes to have the thing in reality.
So, okay, I get that there is a sort of tempering of expectations that needs to happen.
A tempering of relationship mythology.
Yes. Absolutely. I say all the time, and you all heard me say before on the show that many of us are striving for our grandmama and granddaddy's relationship and don't realize that your grandmother has a glass eye because she got into a fight, with a brawl with a chick because such and such happened between your granddaddy got two women down the street pregnant. Right? Like, I just made that up. That is not my life story. I'm just, and that is nobody I know's life story, but I am sure it's one of y'all's life story. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to make sure I see you. Just, my grandma's like, who are you talking about? Cause it's damn sure not me. No.
Glass eye granny is themselves near you. Okay.
So I'm trying to sell that play to, that I have a script. I'm trying to give that to Lee Daniels. But no, we're striving for these relationships, and we don't know what's gone into people maintaining those relationships and getting to those points and getting to a space where they are able to tolerate and live and love each other unconditionally. Like, nobody thinks about that. But I do want to draw attention, and under the umbrella of aging, I struggle when I see older men and they're still doing shit from back in the day, older gay men, older Black gay men at that. And they're still trying to relive this experience and time in their life when they, I guess, felt like they were at their prime. And so you see them, they're at all the parties that you don't even know about, and the parties that you know about, and the clubs that you know about or don't know about. They're circling around the schoolyards looking for the young boys. They used to do that all the time when in the AUC. They would ride around in their drop tops and their BMWs and go about trying to find a nice little tenderoni.
With extra sauce.
I may have gotten scooped up. But it didn't go far. Because I needed substance, so what about those men? Like, what's the problem? Because they're dating these young boys and they're going in and they realize that at some point the window of when they can control will soon close. And then they dump the little boy and go on to the next. What do you call that person?
Okay. You may or may not realize the door you opened up with this question. So I'm going to say the thing.
I don't, but I'm excited.
All right. Every single relationship is really an exchange of value, right? And so when we're talking about long-term relationships generally, the number one predictor of relationship longevity is having compatible core values, right? So every single relationship, no matter how long or short, is an exchange of value. But if your values aren't compatible, it's likely going to be a seasonal relationship, or it's going to be rife with conflict. So that's pretext. What people want out of a relationship, though, is going to be unique to where they happen to be, right? So you have your values, you have your life experiences, you also have your trauma, right? Like, you have all these different things as a kind of big picture context for why you go after who and what you go after. And when we're talking about older people who are specifically focused on younger people, they're often not looking for a relationship that is.
What are we considering older people, by the way? I just want to clarify.
Whatever.
I feel like I'm in the older people.
Whatever you meant when you said older. Okay. And let's be clear. Let's operationalize this, right? There's a difference between I randomly met someone who happens to be significantly older or younger. And let's say significant is over 10 years of an age difference. Okay, let's just operationalize for the sake of conversation, right? 10 plus years different. That's different. If I meet you randomly and we just kind of vibe and we happen to have a bigger age difference, that's different than me intentionally seeking people out who have a big age difference because of the age difference. So there are a few different reasons why this happens. From that perspective of being younger and searching for an older partner, it's often some parental issues that we're bringing into the situation, right? We're looking for our father. We're looking for our mother, right? If we date women, but usually seeking out someone who's of a significant age older than us is because we're looking for a parent.
But what are the younger folks? What's going on with the folks that's looking for the younger folks?
We're looking for power. So those relationships are not.
Hold on, let that sink in for a second. I want to let that sink in.
Let's let it stew. Let's let it stew. It's power. Okay.
So could the younger person be looking for power too?
Absolutely. Power or proximity to power.
Or being in power, or I guess being somebody dominating them. But then, oh my gosh.
Yes.
Oh, this is a hidden therapy session.
I told you the door was open, friend. The door was open.
So this is interesting.
Yeah. So here's what's interesting though, or what else is interesting. All relationships are power dynamics, but the dynamics of that power are specific to the people in the relationship. So when we're looking for an equal partnership, we're looking for an equal distribution of power, right? And power doesn't necessarily mean I have more money or we have the same amount of money. Like money isn't always about power, but sometimes people use money as a way to assert their power. Right. So I have more money and I go for people who don't necessarily have their financial lives handled. So it allows me to retain a sense of power and control in the relationship because I'm controlling the finances. Right. So there are certain ways that can come up. But on the whole, every relationship is going to be a power dynamic. And if you are searching for people who have less power than you in some form or fashion. And often when we're talking about age, we want someone who's younger because we assume that youth means you're immature, means you don't know nothing, means you're not smart enough to recognize when I am attempting to control you or you don't have enough power to do anything about it. Right.
So I get you on the matter of relationships being a power dynamic. I understand that. And I think that what I'm also struggling with a bit is the dynamic becomes murky when I consider, like, I guess growing up, especially coming down to the South, what I have seen are women looking to provide that sort of fill that gap. Like I have power over my household while, let's say, my husband is working. And that's very privileged white woman way of thinking about power. Right. I know women who said, I'm going to get this degree, but I'm looking for a husband because I'm not trying to work and he's going to work and I'm going to take care of my house. I've seen that amongst women, a lot of Black women who I went to school with in the AUC. I'm trying to figure out how that transfers over to a relationship when they're two men. Now I have seen some men say, hey, I'm trying to just take care of the house. And while he works, that works for some, doesn't work for others. But I also have, I guess we're probably trying to mimic that sort of heteronormative perspective of what a relationship is. But it also makes it difficult for people because I've had people ask me and Alan, like, which one of you, who's the man and who's the woman? So who cleans up and who cooks? Who takes out the trash? Who fixes stuff? Like trying to put that sort of heteronormative perspective on a gay relationship, like trying to put a round peg in a square hole, essentially. And it goes back to the, I guess, question at hand, which is aging. We don't see relationships. We don't really see, like, I think because we don't see them, because we don't have visibility to them, because we don't have a lot of proximity to them, it just seems almost like taboo. It's like the Chronicles of Narnia. And let's also acknowledge that people, and we talked about this, I think before, love and relationships are becoming so complex now because people are mobile. People are more mobile than they ever been. And it's not about developing relationships in the spaces that you're in, but it's definitely about like, okay, this week I'm in Dallas at this party or this function. Next week I'm going to be in DC. This time I'm going to be here. And if you can't fit into that sort of rotation of I'm going to all the hot spots where people are because I want to be seen and see people, then how are you finding love?
Yeah. So, all right, let me address a couple of things because you bring up some really cool points. So first thing is, quiet as it's not kept, the heterosexual template doesn't work for many heterosexual relationships.
Right? Say that one more time.
Quiet as it's not kept, the heterosexual template does not work for many heterosexual relationships, right? So what we have to recognize is anytime we see a play for power in any form, it is often because the people who were seeking out that power had some sort of situation in their past where they felt like their power was taken away from them. And so when we think about power dynamics, particularly unhealthy power dynamics, whenever we're talking about toxic relationships, we're talking about unhealthy power dynamics, right? You have to not have good boundaries in order for power to be out of whack. If you have great boundaries, you also have a great relationship with power. with your own power and with your ability to assert that in interaction with other people. So when we're talking about the old ways of heterosexual relationships, especially, we live in a patriarchal society where all the power was distributed based on gender, race, right? Like all those different things. And there's a quote, the way we see divinity, so the way we see God, determines the way we see anthropology or the way we see humanity. And that determines the way we organize our society. So if we see God as the most powerful being in the universe, and we see that being as a heterosexual, cisgender, able-bodied white man, then when we look at our society, when we organize the rules and norms of culture, the person who has more of those qualities is what we equate to being closer to God, and therefore we distribute power along those qualities. So the closer you are to a heterosexual white cisgender man, the more power you have in a society that sees God through that lens, that sees power, right? Because God is essentially the source of power if you believe in God. And if you see it that way, that's how you then see it in play in your life. So back in the day, women only had so much choice because of the way society was set up. And this is not an inherent choice, right? Women are not inherently less powerful than men. It is a cultural conditioning that makes that true. The same thing with race. There's no black people and white people, any other, like these things are not true in nature. They're true in culture, and culture is conditioned, right? So when we look at that, what we have to ask ourselves is, what type of relationship do I actually want? Do I want a relationship where healthy power dynamics exist? Because if so, that requires me to do work in developing a healthy relationship with my own power. And a lot of people who are in the relationship process have not already reconciled their own power. And that's where abuses of power then come into play in our relationships, whether we're talking about sexual, emotional, financial abuse, whether it's like, it doesn't really matter what we're talking about. But if you have a healthy relationship with your own power, you don't then create these traumatic situations for other people in regards to their power. So that I just wanted to make sure that was brought up in the conversation.
So you just coming in and dropping mics,
you know? No, I'm not going to drop that one, but yeah.
Please don't. So it's just, we touched on, I think we can go deeper into just this idea of loving and aging and relationships and aging. But it's a complex onion.
Yes.
That has so many different layers to it, because it definitely can be informed by your life experience, the lens in which you approach life, which could be, like you said, very much associated with where you find or where you see power, or how you, I guess, take in power. I will say, using me as my own example, I know in the past when I was dating, it wasn't until I realized there was something. So once again, I usually liked older men. Older people, mainly, because even when it was women, it was older than me, which something else I need to unpack with my therapist. But I realized one thing, and that one thing, and I didn't realize this probably until about 30 something, is that when I started to take my power back, that's when that particular individual didn't find me of interest anymore. Because at that point, I realized I had a voice. Or at that point, I realized, like, no, I can say no. No is a sentence. That's it. I started to realize, like, yeah, that was when it became the power dynamic shifted so much. So it became I'm not really interested, like, in you anymore. It happened, when I was the last time it happened. Yeah. Well, not last time, but one of the last times it happened was when I first moved to Atlanta, started dating the person who was riding around the AUC looking, for young tenderoni who didn't know any better, and realized that I was falling into a space where I could be controlled, which is interesting because my grandmother always warned me about controlling people and making sure that you maintain your control, but you didn't know what power you had back then. So anyway, long story shorter. Yeah. When you start to find your voice, you become less appealing to folks and then maybe that's the cycle of an older gay Black man who's just continuing to date younger people. But switching gears, still on the subject of love and aging, what about older Black gay men finding each other? I know some people who are like, no. I know some people who've been serial daters, and so they just end up, but I'm going to throw in a wrench here. What about, I noticed that a lot of the older gay men who are single are secretly dating their friends. They have their best friend that they aren't romantically involved, but they're providing the companionship and the love that they're seeking from someone else. And so if nobody can provide it that way that friend is, then they can't ever find any love, or they can't find or the friend is providing it in a way, but they're looking for Boris Cujo, but the friend looked like, I'm not going to say anybody's name.
Not Boris.
Not Boris Cujo. I was like, let me not do that. But the friend doesn't look like Boris Cujo. And as a result, they are getting it there, but then they can't get it no place else.
Yeah. So first things first, I got to say, I love these complex questions because there's so many angles we can really dive into. So you're keeping me on my toes. So I'm like, ooh, I gotta pick a lane. So here's how I would approach this. First things first is going back to this expectations piece, right? The primary reason relationships fail isn't infidelity or money. It's the frustration we experience as a result of our unmet, often unrealistic expectations, right? And what I see in the case of people I've worked with who are older and have struggled in relationships, and this is not really an age thing, but this is definitely something I have noticed as a pattern with older people, is they have tended to keep unrealistic expectations a lot longer. And so when we think of what we want in a partner, there are these really, really long lists of what that includes. And often the things that are our preferences are not the things we often need. And people don't know how to keep those things in perspective, right? So the difference is, if it's just a preference, one of the analogies I use for this is, if you prefer apples over oranges, you'll take the apple when the apple's there. But if there's no apple, you'll take the orange, right? However, people are not really talking about preferences. They're often talking about barriers to connection, because if there's no apple, they're also not taking the orange. That's not a preference. That was a deal breaker that you're calling a preference. And so it's our own perception of our behavior that can often be a blind spot for us, because there's so many people who can actually meet your needs. But the problem is we're looking for the preference as the signal of whether or not this is right for us, rather than the need to be fulfilled. And so there are so many people who have the preference of being attractive and being a certain height and being all these different things. But those qualities are surrogates for the internal qualities. And a lot of people haven't done the work of clarifying what the real qualities are internally that they're using these physical qualities as surrogates for. And so to your point, this person has a friend who is meeting the actual needs, but they don't look like what the person expects. Right. And because of that, they're still getting value from the relationship, but they're not allowing themselves to have a fuller relationship because the person doesn't check all 90 of the other boxes. And so if you're someone who's struggling with relationships and I ask you, what are the qualities you're looking for? And you give me a list of 100 things, that list of 100 things is the problem, because you have too many. If we just look at pure statistics, only about 10 to 15% of people are 6 feet tall or taller, right? 10 to 15%. Only about 18% of people, individuals, make 6 figures or more. So if you want somebody who's 6 feet and makes 6 figures, that's 10% of 10%. That's only 1% of people. And we haven't even added emotionally available and intelligent. We haven't added our education level. We haven't added any of those other qualities that people go for, right? And so sometimes we set ourselves up for failure. The odds are not in our favor because we excluded ourselves from the game. Dating is a game, right? It is a numbers game, but it is also an emotional game, and it can be a lot of fun. But if you don't realize it's a game in the first place, you don't learn the rules, and then you can't win.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, are the rules different to pace? Are they like spades and bidwis and Uno? Do the rules differ based upon what region you're from? Right?
There are some cultural norms that do impact the ways that we date. But what is true? So while culture shifts, right? Norms and rules shift. human psychology has not shifted much since the dawn of people, right? So the way that we connect with people is still the same on an internal level. We might take different external methods to get there, but what is going on inside of us is the same thing that was going on inside of us 2,000, 5,000 years ago. Our psychology has not changed. And the problem is people are not learning how people work. And they're depending too much on how this piece of technology works or this particular norm in the community works. And it's like, yeah, but how do people work? Because you might know this stuff, but if you also don't know the internal layers, you can't create a strategy that's going to help you effectively navigate that, right? So you might be like, oh, most of the gay people where I live go out to the clubs and to bars. Cool, but those are not the best ways to connect on an emotional level. So you have to know how to navigate the transition from one place to another or from one mode to another in order to effectively deal with those different changes that may occur regionally. But ultimately, the way people work is still the way people work. And we're not doing enough learning and skill development around the way people work.
That's fair. But I will say one of the things the differences that I experienced in moving from the North to the South was seeing how relationships, like marriage wasn't a thing. It was a thing, but it wasn't a thing, right?
I mean, we technically couldn't get married until the last.
Well, no, I'm not even talking about us. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about just in general, the example we had in front of us in terms of like what we saw love to be. You know, our grandparents and stuff were married. Some of our parents were married. But a lot of our parents weren't, their relationships just seemed really. You didn't really see what relationships were growing up in the Northeast. It was like, yeah, I knew that such and such dated such and such, but what does that mean? I don't know. Mm-hmm. It was almost like a black hole. You didn't really know how to date. Nobody taught you how to date. Nobody taught you how to pursue or to court or to do any of those things. And so it wasn't until I probably moved down to the South where I started to see it a little differently. Mm-hmm. And maybe I wasn't paying it attention. Maybe it was more lustful because I was, I didn't move down to the South until I came down to go to school. So before then I was in high school, and that was
You're a kid.
I made it. Maybe that's what it is. It's where I think maybe once I got down to Atlanta, I was of a certain age where I could see relationships differently. Mm-hmm. But back then, and once again, probably engaging and dating with people who I shouldn't have been.
And you bring up a very key topic here. And this really relates to the possibility models conversation we were having before, right? If we don't see examples of relationships in our own families growing up, external possibility models become so much more important if that's something that we want, right? If we grow up in a family where our parents are married, they show us how they navigate the challenges of being in a relationship, they've done it successfully, and they talk to us about what's happening and explain the process, we have a much easier time understanding what's realistically required when we go out and date. But if we didn't have that growing up, we don't know that from our earlier experiences. And so what we tend to do is follow what we know already, right? That's just general conditioning. If this is what we've experienced, we tend to go after that. Even if it's not something we particularly want or consciously desire, we will often fall back on what we are familiar with. And that's why people get into the same sort of relationship situations with the same type of person over and over and over and over, right? It didn't work, but your brain, the way our brains are set up, I went through a situation, I didn't die, so I'm safe, even though I don't like it. It was some bullshit, but I'm going to do it again because I know I survived. I didn't die, right?
I know how to survive longer for the next one.
Exactly. And that's just that lizard part of our brain talking, right? There's not the bigger conscious cognitive part of the brain. That's just the instinctual part. I didn't die. I can do it again. And the issue is, it is not our fault how we grew up, right? Your parental situation, whether or not they were together or not, whatever happened to us as a kid, like that environment is not our fault or our responsibility. But once we become adults, if we want something and we recognize that we didn't learn how to do something effectively, while it wasn't our fault that we grew up the way we did, if we don't now take responsibility for developing whatever skills we might need for whatever it is that we're after, whatever happens after that is our responsibility, right? So sure, your parents didn't give you what you needed, and you now know that. Are you going to go and learn what you need, or are you going to keep blaming your parents and being frustrated by the lack of results you're getting, right? And that's just an adult thing to kind of consider. But we don't always have access to that, right? We don't always have the awareness that is that simple, at least from like an explanatory level. So
but how much of this has to do with slavery?
A lot, but also because I was like,
slavery.
Lot. But again, there's conditioning, and then there's decisioning. Yeah, we went through a whole lot of stuff. Here's what I'm really saying. A lot of people think that they have free will, but they don't. If you were still operating based on shit that you didn't have any control over, you're not exercising the free will that you so loudly proclaim you have. Free will is making decisions to use what you got to get what you want, or to acquire what you don't have.
People don't know how to use free will, though. I mean, you. Some people don't know how to use free will,
and that's my point. I think our conversation is like layered in that. Sometimes we're having this conversation from the lens that everybody can just do anything that they want to do and can figure stuff out. Sometimes we're having the conversation from the lens of, oh, but people went through some traumatic stuff and that's why they're doing what they're doing. Other times we have this conversation from the lens of, but I'm frustrated because why aren't there better quality people in the dating pool? Like sometimes we're just pointing and shooting in the dark and not focused on what we actually can do something about.
Which is
because again, the number one reason people are single is not because of slavery. It's not because of their childhood wounds. It's not because they didn't have enough money. It's because they haven't been developing the skills. And if we just do a simple comparison, right? If we look at how much time, money, energy we've invested in developing our professional skills, how much schooling we've gone to, how many professional development workshops, like all the stuff we've done to develop our professional skills. And we just compare that to how much time, energy, money we've invested in developing our relationship skills. It's easy to see why, for many people, our careers are going to be better than our relationships.
So this is a good segue into the question I have. Do you think, I think this, and I could be wrong, but I still think it anyway, so it doesn't matter. I feel like from a professional standpoint, you are seen as being a leader if you're in a relationship, especially a long-standing relationship. And so this is still talk about aging somewhat, but what I've noticed is because I can say that I'm married and because I can say that Al and I have been together for X number of years, like people see you as being more relatable and or you can negotiate better. You just have skills to deal with people. So it's almost like, oh, and I even think now having a child puts me in another category where it's like, not only can you deal with another person, you can deal and train up another person. Like you have management skills.
It's like a client testimonial. That's what being married and having a kid. It's like, oh, somebody likes you enough to stick with you. I guess I can give you a chance. This goes back to the conversation of all relationships are about an exchange of value. And if you have something that people consider valuable, they're more likely to listen to you and take your advice. Right. Which makes sense because one of the things that people do that gets them into trouble is they're expecting someone who doesn't share their values to value them. And it's like that doesn't follow. You want people who share your values to be the ones who are giving you counsel, advice, information, whatever, because what matters to you matters to them. If this doesn't matter to you at all, I don't care what you think about it because you're not invested in the actual quality of the thing because it doesn't matter to you. So, of course, people who want a relationship are going to look up to you if you have the relationship and they don't. Or people who are also in relationships are like, yeah, you get me, right? We in this together. So there's a level of self-referencing that happens when someone has what you want.
When someone has something you want.
Because now, even if it's not something I can get from you, I then believe that you can help me get it if I don't have it and I want it. Because you clearly have it. So you must be doing something right.
I don't, honestly, I can say you don't know if you're doing anything right. You just wake up every day and just say, I'm going to take this one step at a time. I learned a long time ago I
Yeah.
was like, I learned a long time ago, instead of like when I had expectations of what it should have been, and when I got disappointed, that's when I was ready to call it quits. And so my thing is, if you start off fresh every morning, you've now won another chance.
It's true. It's like true power is recognizing that we really are just making all of this up as we go. Like that's what.
Yes, absolutely.
The ability.
Absolutely. I agree. Whew. Well, that was meaty. And I ran low. I should have brought the bottle downstairs, but I didn't. So, all right, let's see. Now, Amari, this, feel free. Just know you don't have to be on the responding end the entire time. So, okay, y'all, we haven't been having like a conversation that we normally have because, of course, somebody wouldn't be getting asked questions the entire time. But sometimes you do meet somebody and you ask them a bunch of questions. So I'm going to make sure I'm being aware. Amari asked questions because I just had so many.
You know what one of my questions is? This is not a rhetorical question. Okay, I'll start there. But it does relate to our conversation around culture and individual choice and all those different things, right? I think a lot of times when we think about communication, for example, the best communicators are those who are aware of multiple things. You're self-aware, you're aware of the other person, what they need, what they're after, you're aware of the context that you're having the conversation in, you're aware of any potential noise that's happening in between, like all those things you have an awareness of, and you're able to adjust your communication to fit the environment. And whatever we're not aware of is essentially a blind spot that we have, and we can't do anything about it until we're then aware of the thing, right? The thing I've been wondering, we all got the Google now, and it just fascinates me that more people aren't asking the questions in a place where they can actually get the answers. We're often asking questions, and maybe it's people that we trust, but it's not people who actually have the answer, or we are just assuming things and just like, no, maybe it's this, and then we take it as fact. And I've always been curious why people don't just look it up, because a lot of the stuff we've already figured out, like the answer already is there. The science already is there. And if we're going to trust a TikTok, why aren't we trusting other information that we could easily find? But the real question is, why aren't we looking it up, right? Why aren't we more inquisitive about how to solve problems when we recognize we have a problem? That's a question. I don't know if you have an answer, right? Or that you need an answer, but yeah.
Well, I get what you're saying. Yeah. And it goes like, so Dante just put in the chat, people don't want to know. Amari, ignorance is bliss. If I don't have to know.
It's fair. And that begs the other question, like when people are single and they're struggling, or telling people they're struggling, it's like, do you really want a relationship? Or do you really want, like, wanting a relationship?
Or do you just like the idea of it? Because if you don't look like you want a relationship, now you seem weird because everybody else around you, they want a relationship. And so now you gotta be like, oh my gosh, I want a relationship so bad.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, I really would love to be in a relationship with somebody. And deep down inside, you're like, I can't stand people. I don't want nobody in my goddamn house, like, or in my space. Like, you could definitely be a person who's interested in themselves. Like, when did the asexual become a bad person? Now she was a little weird. But in Brookhaven, when I lived in Brookhaven, it was a woman. She used to announce that she was an asexual. She had a whole shirt on. Now she also seemed a little weird, but I also wonder, was she weird to me because she was an asexual?
I don't think
and
so.
She didn't really care to have relationships with other peoples per se. She just wanted to, be with herself. That was her thing. I actually talked to her one time. It was a really odd conversation, but I just kept asking myself, is it because she doesn't really care to be with anyone else but herself?
And that's possible. Like, I'm of the belief that everybody just doesn't require a romantic relationship in the way that we think about relationships.
Right. It could be a relationship with yourself, a relationship with two people, a relationship with one other person, a relationship with multiple people. What do they call it? An ethical non-monogamous relationship now.
So many different forms of life to live. And I don't think any of them are right or wrong. I think it's just what matters to you. is what matters to you. Again, going back to the values, you brought up a really good point that sometimes, and this is technically called mimetic desire, is when we want something just because we see other people wanting it. We don't actually want it ourselves, but in order for us to feel accepted or whatever, we might want the same thing too, so that we feel included in whatever the people that we value are doing, right? Like, that's totally fair. And I think there's a level of discernment that all of us could develop where we recognize, like, one, everybody doesn't want the same thing we want, and that's okay. And then sometimes we got to give people grace because they're doing what they know. Like, if we actually knew better, we would be doing better, and knowing in our bodies, not just in our heads, because you can learn something. Sometimes, right? You can learn something and be like, "Oh, I get this," but it's not muscle memory learning. It's not in your body. You haven't practiced and implemented what you know. And so, what I find is a lot of pretty much all of this still really goes back to the skills. If this is something you want, and I'm making that distinction very clearly. First, get clear. Do you really want a relationship or not? Second, if you do, what type of relationship really matters to you? Not what looks cute, not what other people say is going to be great, but what really fucking matters to you. Because if you can distill it down to that, it's often going to be so much easier to find. The reason my success rate is so high with clients, the reason they're so able to get into relationships, even though the data says you're 200 to 300% more likely to find love if you go through dating coaching first. I think that the reason this is so true is, one, I help my clients get crystal clear on exactly what they want without all the fluff and the frills that don't matter. And then two, we develop the skills to go and get that. And if we just do those two things, if we know who we are, know what we want, and then have the skills to go get it, we don't have to have these big conversations about why there's pee in the dating pool. Friend, the problem is not that there's pee in the pool. The problem is so many people just don't know how to swim. Let's please stop making people's lack of being able to swim about what's
somebody peed in the pool, Amari. Somebody peed in the pool.
I mean, yeah, but our ability to filter has nothing to do with whether or not somebody peed in the pool.
Okay, that's fair.
Our ability to swim, our swimming skills, aka our dating skills, are not based on what may or may not be in the water.
You just can't navigate this pissy water because you don't have the skills.
Because great news, you can go to another body of water. If there's pee in this pool, go to another pool, go to a lake, go to the river that you're used to. Go to the ocean. Like, there's so many other options, right? If you want to get wet, go where the water is, and the pool is not the only option to get wet. But again, that's a skills and awareness thing.
So I just want to make this loud and clear for the folks within the Legitimaquah community, specifically the gays. The gays, I want you to lean in a little bit.
Get close.
What Amari said was, you need to get your skills up.
That's it. Level up your dating skills to level up your love life.
Get your skills up. And this is applicable to no matter what age you are, no matter where you are on life's journey, you still gonna need these skills. And the good part about these skills is that they are applicable not just in your relationship, but also in life. These are life skills.
Yes.
They're not just relationship specific skills. So I feel like we can talk so much more, but we don't have enough time.
Next time we might have to go into what the skills are, because we talk about this and people might be like, okay, I get it, skills, but what are the skills? So that could be.
So let's follow up on that one. But I want you to know, I really, 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 really appreciated this conversation. I hope that the other sippers appreciate it as well. I hope you learned something. And I also I don't know what accent that was. That must have been my DC accent. Mm-hmm. That was I'm never going to do that. But no, I really appreciate you all taking time and chatting with us today. Amari, I specifically appreciate you chiming in and offering a wealth of perspective to consider. And while we talked about aging, we talked about love and aging, I feel like we were able to hit on so many other different topics. And so I would love to have you on again so that we can continue these conversations under the guise of love. And so thank you for that.
Yeah, a pleasure for sure.
For those of you listening, please continue to like, share, subscribe, follow, all that jazz, because we need your support. And this show doesn't show if you don't show. So hit me up on IG, i.am.samad, or you can hit me up on Facebook. You all know my name. Amari, where can people find you?
Yeah, easiest thing is on Instagram. You can find me at Prince Amari. Prince spelled Printe, and then Amari, Amari. And if you want to know what level your dating skills are on, you can take there's actually an assessment for this at datingskillquiz.com, and it'll tell you exactly where your skills stand.
Awesome. I really, really appreciate you. I really, really appreciate everyone else. Until next time, y'all, I'm out.
Cheers.